episode number 190 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Jessica Lorion. Jessica has spent the past 12 years as a professional actor and voiceover artist in New York City. Now is a host and producer of Mamas in Training podcast. She supports pregnant women and aspiring moms on the journey into motherhood. What makes her show different from any other pregnancy and motherhood podcast is that she is not yet a mom. An autoimmune disease has delayed her journey into motherhood, and she has decided to learn right alongside her audience. With a background in performing on stage, in front of camera, as well as being a professional singer, her mission is to spread the importance of studying motherhood. She intends to use her voice and desire to connect with women everywhere, to share the lessons she has learned and give community to those in need. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So welcome to the podcast, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I've been learning so much from you, and it's so wonderful to now be a guest and sit on the other side of the table.
Fantastic. That's so cool. So you have an interesting story. I used to actually work in New York as well.
I know. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so we're New Yorkers. So I wanted to have you share your story with the guests, and you also have a podcast, and you're interested in preparing yourself, but have also your own journey. So I'd love for you to share your story.
Yeah. So it's a little untraditional because my podcast, Mamas in Training, is for aspiring and expecting moms. And we talk all about pregnancy and birth, but I'm not yet a mom. And people are always a little confused about that. But I think that there's a real importance in having a space and creating a space and a community for those of us who maybe, unfortunately, whether we want to or not, we have time and we're in a period of waiting, or we are choosing to have a time and a period of waiting before we actually become mothers, and we take this opportunity to learn. So the way I got onto this crazy journey started all the way back in 2011. So I live in New York City. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so not too far away, but I pretty much came here right after college. My eyes were set on the Big Apple from the beginning, mainly because I'm an actor as well. And I was primarily focused initially on theater. Now I do a little bit more like commercial TV film, but theater was always at the top of my mind. And I moved here right away with that intention. And in 2011, I had the amazing opportunity to be on the national tour of Beauty and the Beast. And that meant that I was traveling the country and Canada, just performing on stages, meeting people. I mean, it was truly a dream come true. And it felt as if it was at the height of my career. It was something that I had always dreamed of. And I was getting paid to do something that I loved. But the ironic thing is that simultaneously, I got hit with this health crisis, at least it felt for me. And so it was like this balancing act of this unbelievable, thrilling journey that I was on. And then this, what ended up being debilitating journey that I was going on. And so there was a lot leading up to it, but I had initially started off just experiencing a couple like spots all over my body. And it actually started at the beginning of tour. And I think that was caused from a lot of stress I was going through. And then a year after that, I was completely covered head to toe. And that ended up being diagnosed as psoriasis. So then, I tried all kinds of things, different diets and all of these things to help support. And nothing really ended up working. And I ended up going on a medication, and it was a biological medication, and it sort of helped in the meantime. It at least helped my mindset because my skin started to clear up a little bit, and it was good for my confidence, I'll say.
Yeah.
And then about a year or so after being on that medication, I was in Los Angeles. I was performing at the theater there, and my now husband, but boyfriend at the time, was visiting me. And I had bought these new shoes, these new sandals, and we were walking around the city a lot. And so my feet started to hurt. And I was like, oh man, I have to return these sandals. I guess like they're not supportive enough, which they weren't. But, I figured I'm tough. I'm young. I was like 26. I'm like, I can make anything happen. And the pain wouldn't go away. I returned the sandals and pain wouldn't go away. And it got so bad that one night when we were back in this Airbnb that we were staying in, I literally couldn't get out of bed and walk to the bathroom to brush my teeth.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
he had to carry me just so I could brush my teeth.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
he had to carry me back to bed. And the pain persisted over and over again. And, so here I am now, like doing the thing that I love more than anything. But it was actually the very first time in over a year that I had to call out of the show, meaning I couldn't perform. I had never missed a show, and there's a level of pride as a performer to not miss shows. And it was heartbreaking for me to sit at home in such pain when I knew that the show was going on. So after that, and after a lot of testing and figuring out what was happening, I ended up getting diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis. So the
Wow.
psoriasis that I first had and continued to have then developed into the arthritic part of it. And I ended up going on another medication to sort of heal myself and manage it. And it did. But I was told when I went on this medication that if I ever wanted to have children, I absolutely couldn't on this medication. If I were to get pregnant, I'd have to have an abortion, 100%, no questions asked.
Wow.
And so we were thrown into this period of waiting, whether we wanted to or not. And at the time it was fine. I was young. We were not in a place to, start a journey. But it was about around 2019 that I was really feeling like that itch for motherhood. And I'm like, okay, like I'm ready. What do we do now? And how do I start this journey to get off medication? And what is that going to look like? And how can I stay positive? And that's really when it kind of hit me. And I think my artistic, side, my creativity side, my passion for storytelling really collided with a need for a positive focus. And I know, anybody who's going through a fertility challenge, no matter where it comes from or what the reasoning is behind it, or even if you're just in a period of waiting, because your partner's not ready or something else is going on, finances aren't ready or whatever, and you're in this period of waiting, you need something positive to keep you going. And that's what I was looking for. So that's when, pun intended, Mamas in Training, the podcast was born.
Yeah.
Because I needed to create something that I could focus on daily, weekly. And so I decided to create a space where I could learn about motherhood before I was there and learn from women about what they wish they had known before they became moms, so that I could take this period of waiting, learn from their, previous wishes and desires, or maybe mistakes, if they wanted to call it that, and become as prepared as possible. I know that you'll never fully prepared for motherhood, but yeah, as prepared as possible. So that's where Mamas in Training was born. And that's why it kind of came about.
That's a cool story. And it's funny because when you first reached out to me, you emailed me and then you had mentioned the podcast and yourself. And so my initial thought was, well, this might be a little triggering because I have a lot of people listening who are trying to conceive. And then, of course, I understood your story and it made more sense and it was definitely more fitting. But on top of that, I kind of think that there is something really cool about that too, even though it can be tough for people to think about, but it's an important thing to think about because it is a part of the journey, is really preparing your body, but also your mind, and allowing yourself to delve into that, even though it could be a little scary.
Yeah.
Is really powerful as well.
Well, and I have to, put a little caveat in there and be sensitive, because while I'm in a period of waiting, I have not, until literally about like a month or so, been able to even try to conceive. Like I was not even allowed to. So my period of waiting looked different. So anybody who's been on an infertility journey for a long time, for even if it's been, a month, it can feel like forever. But I don't want to be insensitive to how they might be feeling or experiencing. But I just want to encourage anybody that there can be a mindset shift, I think, if you're open to it and if you're in a positive, healthy, supportive space for it, that there are things that we can learn. And actually, in the end, if we do this work while we're in this period of waiting, we can be so much more prepared in the future. And I know some people go the other way. It's like, I'm having trouble, and so I want nothing to do about it, nothing to think,
Sure.
There's feelings of jealousy and all of these things that come into play. And I completely understand that. But I think if you're in the right space to, do the not the research, because it's not work, but to just let the information kind of seep into your brain, maybe through a podcast or any other way, I think it can just be supportive in a way that you don't really expect.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, because as I'm doing this, and I work a lot with women in person and online that are trying to conceive. So I have this conversation a lot. And sometimes they do get to this point where they allow themselves to really envision it, because sometimes it takes a while to even get to that point. There's hurt, there's loss. And then some of my patients, some of my clients, some of the listeners are actually experiencing secondary infertility. So they already have a child, and they could definitely benefit from the information because they're already mamas and wanting to continue to grow that. So there's such a huge spectrum of different cases and stories. And I do think that there is some power in really allowing yourself to at least imagine something that also has pain involved, because then you may be able to take away the pain with that image of motherhood, because in a sense, that's what you want. You don't want pain with that vision, but it is a very difficult thing. And sometimes it just happens. So depending on where you are in your journey, some people, it's too raw. They're just not ready. There's so many different levels and paths and places that people are. But I do have some patients that are like, I'm ready. They write letters to their unborn child. I mean, sometimes you get to this place where you're ready to do that, or face it, or look at it in some form. But again, every stage is sacred, and every stage and every place that people are in, there's no right or wrong. There's so many different ways, but I do think it's nice to have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, when I reached out to you, what I was reaching out to share were what I've discovered to be, and call the 3 pillars of motherhood: advocacy, planning and preparing, and community. And yeah, I can see how it absolutely could be, not supportive, or can send somebody down a negative path if they were to even think about the word motherhood and what that even might mean. It could be really triggering. But I think what it gives you is strength. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing these 3 pillars, because after interviewing over 100 moms, this is what they've said: advocacy, planning and preparing, and community. Those are the 3 pillars that they wish they had connected to before they became moms. And let me tell you that, like, I feel like I should go back and do an actual calculation, but I would be willing to bet that about 85% of those women that I've interviewed have struggled with some aspect of fertility, whether it's first, with their first child, or secondary infertility. They have struggled in some way. So I think that there's you can be empowered and you can find strength in knowing that these 3 pillars are essential to really creating the foundation for what the future will hold. Because listen, if someone desires to be a mom, they will be a mom through and through, no matter what it means and no matter what it takes. So it can only help support us to have that strength.
Totally. And you know what I'm thinking about is that I work with women to prepare their bodies really for motherhood. That's what I do. I mean, also their minds, but
Right.
in a sense to kind of prepare their minds so that their minds can support their bodies and get them prepared really for conception. But how often do we really prepare our minds for like motherhood?
Right.
You know, so
Right.
it's kind of like that aspect of it is ignored. We're preparing for just the conception part or the body, and we're very focused on the body, what to do, what to eat, what supplements to take, the acupuncture, and of course the mind, but in the sense that it allows and supports the body to conceive. So I think it's definitely an important conversation, has a place and a role in the fertility journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what are some of the things that you've learned through your interviews? What are certain ahas or just things that you didn't expect, I guess, when going on this? And I'm sure there's many different things, but
oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the list is endless. Probably the best way to explain it, if you don't mind, is I'll just touch on every pillar and something that I've learned from every pillar, especially in terms of when we're in this period of waiting and what we can do. Because very rarely, you know, if we think about like planning and preparing, for example, it's like, well, I don't want to create my birth plan if I'm struggling with fertility, but there are other things that we can do. So like going back to advocacy, I mean, advocacy starts when you're trying to conceive. And I'm sure
absolutely
everybody listening has heard that, right? So it's like, what I can always say, because I haven't necessarily had to advocate for myself in the sense of fertility and like thinking that something's wrong, but going back to my story of my autoimmune disease. So it was about a year and a half or so after I got the diagnosis and I'd been going through everything, I started to develop these spots on like my ankles and feet. And they looked and felt very different from my typical psoriasis that I had been dealing with now for a year and a half. And I went into my doctor and I said, what is this? Can you please, check this out? This feels very different. And he said, oh, that's just your psoriasis. I said, no, I really don't think it is. Can you please do a biopsy and double check? Because it feels different. It's painful in a different sense. And it looks dramatically different. He said, nope, it's just psoriasis. I said, okay, I understand that you feel that way, but please do a biopsy. And he even went as far as saying, I am 99% sure that it's psoriasis. I said, great. So for that 1%, please for me,
for you.
And I had to advocate for myself and like almost yell at this dang
and
doctor.
That's the thing. You go back and forth. You almost have to push back and really like stand your ground.
Yes. And of course, as it turned out, he did the biopsy and it came back that it was something else called vasculitis. Wow. And when I turned back to my other doctor, my rheumatologist, and told him what was going on, he said, well, thank goodness you got that biopsy, because if it wasn't, and we treated it as psoriasis and not vasculitis, vasculitis can have some really dangerous ending results to organs and things like that.
Oh my God.
So the way that we'll treat it is very different from then how you would continue to treat your psoriasis. So that was my very first experience with advocacy that I can remember. And that is the type of advocacy that I want to empower your listeners to really remember when they're starting their fertility journey, or they're going through their fertility journey. Because look, like, we are the only ones who have been with our body for 20, 30, 40 years, experiencing what we're experiencing. And we know when something's a little bit off or something's different. And so I just like to encourage people, like, if you know or you think something's not right, and this one person is telling you one thing, go get a second, third, fourth, however many opinions you need. And that's going to continue into the time that you do get pregnant, or the time that you adopt, or the time that you have a surrogate, or whatever it is. Like, this advocacy continues. And then it also continues, if you do get pregnant, into a birth plan and what you want for your birth plan, and into a birth and how you want that birth to come through. And then, of course, into your postpartum journey and what you want that to look like, and advocating for yourself. I mean, nowadays too, it looks so different. Like, if we have a child in our house, however they came to us, whether it was through our body, our partners, or, a surrogate, an adoptee, what do we want that to look like, especially nowadays with COVID? Like, are we inviting anybody and everybody in? Do we want to advocate for ourselves that we only want people who've been vaccinated? Do we only want people who bring a certain energy into our space? Like, maybe you have a certain sacred energy that you want to keep within your household. And that also pertains to your fertility journey. Like, who do you want around? Who do you want to tell about your fertility journey? Who's going to lift you up, or who's going to maybe take you down? Because even though people feel very entitled to ask about your fertility journey, or very entitled to say, like, oh, you ever having kids? Or, oh, are you going to try to have a kid? And like, well, no shit, Sherlock's, pardon my swearing. Yeah. But it's like, I've been actually trying for a long time. That's not your place. So advocating for yourself, and even in that situation, saying like, well, actually, we've been struggling, so this is what it looks like for us. And it takes people back. So in the pillar of advocacy, that's what I like to empower people to think about, and really, stand up for what is going to make them and their energy and their world that much better and that much supported.
Amen. It's true. But it really, it is something that I've noticed myself just throughout the years, and in so many different ways. But you really do need to stand your ground. And your gut feeling is a real thing. It's like a legitimately real thing that you need to listen to. And it's there for a reason. And sometimes it will be more right than the person in front of you with a bunch of letters next to their name.
Yep. Like, certifications. Yep.
Yep. So it is really important.
And then in the planning and preparing aspect, this is where, I'm sensitive to where people are in their journey. But what I like to encourage is, like, this is a time, if you're open for it, to really, I like to say, drink from the fire hose. Like, let that water of information just come at you, really take it all in. So depending on where you are in your journey and what things you've tried before, I mean, you may be well into your fertility journey and having had tried everything, or you may be just at the very beginning. But there are so many different options for when you are trying to navigate this fertility journey. And so really taking the time to learn about every single option, and not just saying that, okay, this is going to be the only option for me, but doing the research ahead of time to know, like, okay, if this path doesn't work, what are all the other paths that we can go down? And I know that that's challenging, because like, I sit there and I think, okay, this is what I've envisioned. This is my dream of how I want my motherhood journey to be. And that also can be different for everybody. Like, some people don't want to actually give birth. They want to only adopt, or whatever it is. But I think giving yourself the support of knowing what all the options are, and hearing other experiences too, because you might think that one way is going to feel, a certain way, but since you've never gone down that path, you might then hear a story of someone who's had another journey, and it opens your eyes to the possibility of how possible this can be. So I think really taking in all of the options and hearing from other people in a positive way how they've gone through that. And I think too, in planning and preparing and in hearing from other people's stories, this kind of dovetails on the advocacy portion that we talked about. It's also being willing to say to somebody, that is, I'm going to have to interrupt you for a second. That's information that I'm not ready to hear.
Right.
No matter what that is,
That's,
you know?
Yeah, true.
Like I'm so glad that you're willing to share your birth story with me, but unfortunately, my heart can't take that at this moment, or I'm not in a good headspace for that. So I honor what you went through, but I'm just going to have to interrupt you. It's not a rude thing. It's just like what we're going through. Or specifically saying, like, in this time of planning and preparing, like, I only want to hear stories about this, or I only want to hear stories about that. But I do think that there is a strength in knowing what all of your options are, for sure.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is I've talked to many people who have ended up going to do embryo donor or egg donor. And I remember originally they would say, when they first started the journey, they just were focused on getting pregnant naturally or on their own with their own eggs. And once they actually decided to go a different path, they realized it's like the best possible path for them, and they wouldn't change a thing. It was just perfect. And I think that that's what it is. It's okay to think about different things, even though you still have your number one. You can hold on to that number one, but considering the different options and the different paths is okay. It's empowering, actually. It gives you just more to see, more options and more space in the journey.
Yeah. And I think it just sort of creates a little bit of air and a little bit of like possibility for, you know, hope and your future to come through any way it's supposed to evolve. Because when we are so, you know, it's like, oftentimes I've worked with a therapist before who's talked about like holding on to something so tightly. And it's like when you hold on to something specifically, like, this is the only way that this is going to work. This could be with anything, like your career, whatever. Like, this is the only thing, and you're holding on to it so tightly. But it's like, once you open up mentally and spiritually to other options and to other possibilities, I think it just creates room for the wonders of this world, whatever it is that you believe in, to come in and to facilitate whatever journey is going to be yours and whatever's going to unfold.
Yeah. And part of it's our control and part of it's not our control. I think it's this dance with us and the world and life. And so it could show up in so many different ways and so many different forms. And sometimes it's not what we expect, but it ends up being exactly what we need or what's meant for us. Yeah. So it's definitely a lesson in surrender, for sure. And it's hard, you know, so it is kind of
course,
it's a challenge. And so what's the third pillar?
The third pillar is community. And, you know, I think it goes, I like to talk about community in a sense of like third-party community. So not necessarily just your initial family or friends, and what type of support you can get from a third-party group or support, whether that's online or whether that's in person, but giving yourself the space to be seen and heard by people who have no preconceived notions of you and your past or anything. I think in addition, so this can look like, and then I'll go back to my thought, but this can look like, you know, a Facebook group, an online support group, an in-person group, maybe with people in your area. It can take many different forms, and there are memberships and things that people are creating all over. But I think the importance of this is when we're in some sort of a third-party group, it's almost like a mirror is being held up in front of us, and our reflection comes back in connection to what these other people are going through and experiencing. And we get to kind of see ourselves in a different light. And so we might think that we are going through something or feeling something in a certain way, but when we hear other people's journeys or see other people's experiences that are in line with us, we can kind of feel, or what can be revealed is like a different side or something. So, for example, you might see that someone is going through something, and in their experience and in their story, you might see yourself reflected.
Right.
And you might not even realize that you need, deeper support and deeper help through someone like a therapist or someone like that. And you might think that you're just going through and struggling on this journey on your own because this is, quote unquote, what everybody does or the way it is. But you see in somebody else, oh no, there are other ways that I can get support through that. So I like to really encourage people, no matter where they are at in their journey, to find, and it fluctuates, right? So it's like, no matter whether you're in your trying to conceive journey, or whether you end up going through in vitro or adoption, or you end up getting pregnant, now you're in, that group that you're going to be in will shift and flow depending on where you're at in your journey, and feel free to move in and out of different support groups according to what works for you. And so like, I know you have your Facebook group, and so that's a great place for people to go. We have a Facebook group too, Mamas in Training, and every support group is going to be different depending on where you're at, so like if you join Mamas in Training and you're not, I'm an aspiring mom, but I'm not necessarily, I'm in the place that I like want to learn all this information. There might come a time that changes on my journey, because I don't know how my journey is going to unfold right now, but that's the information I want to take in. So that's the information that you're going to find at Mamas in Training. You're going to find people who are aspiring moms or are currently expecting moms, and they're getting support from other women who've been there. But if you know for yourself that that's not a place that's going to lift you up and support you because your fertility journey is in a different place, then you need to find, a support community like your own. I mean, you, Michelle.
Yeah, I understood. Yeah.
That I want to make sure everybody else knows.
We're
like, I don't have a
video,
community.
so she's pointing to me.
Yes, I'm pointing to you. But yeah, like Michelle's group, that is navigating fertility in a different space, or I should say navigating motherhood in a different chapter. So I think, but I just want to encourage people to really connect to some sort of third-party community, because the support and the community that we're going to have within our family could lift us up, but it could also take us down, depending on what that looks like.
Absolutely. Oh, so, yeah. You have to be very careful and choosy, and also protective of your space. When you're going through such a vulnerable time in your life.
Oh yeah, big time. And I think your space is so it's outside of what we physically, see and know. Like I recently interviewed somebody she struggled with a fertility journey, very much so. And she was saying that like her family lived in one area of the States, but at the time she had moved away from that area, and she was actually up in New Hampshire away from everybody. And just mentally, it felt like she could handle this infertility journey better because she had nobody knocking on her door. Instead, it was just phone calls that she could ignore, or she could hang up, or she could say like, I'm, done with this conversation at this moment. So whether that's like physically removing yourself from a situation, I don't want everyone to pick up and move and go buy a new house, but like whether it's physically, changing your location, or it's physically removing yourself from the people that you're around, but knowing that community is going to either lift you up or not. And how do we want to, going back to advocate for ourselves, how do we want to advocate for ourselves in the journey that we want to have?
It's funny because I'm actually looking right now. I just posted something. It was a reel on my on my Instagram, and it goes, wait, let me see exactly what it says. Hold on. It says, it says maybe the next stage of your healing journey is just telling more people to fuck right off.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I saw that one.
Yep. It's so good though. And it's so like accurate and liberating, right?
100%. And I think, there's strength that comes in that, and it can be hard for everybody, especially, if that's not your personality, then I get it. But especially when we're talking about a motherhood journey, whatever that looks like, if you have a desire for motherhood in the future, I think we need to be a little bit more selfish.
Yeah.
And it's
But
not going to look like,
I think self-care or selfish sometimes is selfless, because you're going to show up
exactly.
so much better
Yes.
if you take time out for yourself. You're going to show up so much better for the world, and it's going to be coming from a genuine place, because if you're just giving because somebody's expecting from you, and it's not really coming from you anyway, from your will.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this is a great conversation. I think it is important to think about. It's good to talk. I think it's just healthy to talk in general. And I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your story, because it is vulnerable to share your own battles and challenges that you've dealt with on a very personal level. And I do hope for the best for you. And I hope you find like a true, and I really do believe that we can heal ourselves. It's just a matter of figuring that out. Like, what is it? And sometimes it's a whole journey to unravel and investigate, but it sounds like you're very intuitive, which is why you picked up on what you picked up on when you went to the doctor, and you knew to advocate for yourself. So I think it's really cool that you're doing it not only for yourself, but for others as well. And so for people who want to work with you or want to hear your podcast or get into your community, how can they find you?
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned that we have the Facebook group Mamas in Training on Facebook. Once again, that might not be the space for you, and that's totally okay. But if it is, then we would love to have you in there. Anybody can find the podcast at Mamas in Training. And you can also connect with me on Instagram at Mamas in Training Pod, POD. Mamas in Training is actually MAMAS. I know some people spell mamas in different ways, but yeah, so MAMAS. And if you are interested in delving into just sort of learning about motherhood, which is the intention of the podcast, I would maybe recommend a great place to start would be episode 73, with Elizabeth King, because she talks all about fertility. And I know that you've had her on too. So that might be a great place to connect with the podcast and just hear. But I mean, specifically too, if anybody is looking more for fertility stories, I've covered so many of them, but in this reflection of like, how can we take this time to learn and prepare through other people's journeys? And I will just say, to kind of dovetail off of what you just said in terms of, this process of healing, it sounds much easier said than done, and then the journey. But I'm happy to say that starting back in December, so I back in 2019 is when I said I started sort of this idea of wanting to get off medication and start this journey. And as of this past December, I'm completely medication free. And I did that all on my own without the help of doctors. I have to make sure I add. And I essentially healed myself from my autoimmune disease. And I mean, it's still present in a certain way, but I'm able to be completely off of medication and start my motherhood journey. And also had to wait, until the medication got out of my body and all of these things. It's been a long journey for that. But I just want to empower people that was something, when I had to buy a cane to walk around New York City because at 27, because I literally didn't know what my future was going to look like of my career or my health, to now be standing here medication free and having the ability to try to conceive or start this journey has just been really full circle. And so I just say that to empower anybody that you don't know how your path is going to unfold, and be open to all those possibilities and get that support of people like yourself, Michelle, and, other ways that we can advocate for ourselves and stand up for the journey we're going to have.
And your past does not predict your future.
100%.
And
in so many ways.
Yeah. And how are you feeling?
I feel great. Fantastic. I mean, I still have a little bit of psoriasis here and there. There's some spots, but they're totally manageable. They just look like dry skin now.
Mhm.
But I mean, I haven't had any arthritic pain. I go to the gym 6 days a week and I lift weights. I mean, it's like I'm not, walking around like a delicate flower, and I feel great. So we'll see. I have no idea what my fertility journey will look like, as now that's my only opportunity now to start diving into it. But we'll see.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you feel great. That aspect of it alone is so inspiring. It's really nice to see that you've really trusted your gut in your own healing path, and that's wonderful. So, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on. It was such a great conversation.
You're so welcome. I agree. Thank you for having me.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.